I made a beef bone broth and I wanted to show the process of how I like to store it instead of jars. I poured the broth into this large roasting pan and let it cool overnight. And I wanted to show you that it's solid gelatin. That is a beautiful thing. So what I'll do is I'm going to cut this up and I'm going to put it on this sheet here. I leave the layer of fat on there. It's not too thick. And if I'm making a sauce or something, which I typically use these for sauce, that fat layer is useful. I like to score this into about 2 by 2 squares. And I always want it to gel like this when I do a very hearty broth. Sometimes I just do more of a stock where it's not as thick, and I'll use that for soup bases. But this I like to have on hand for cooking, for sauces and braises and such. And it's easier to store, as you'll see, in Ziploc bags as cubes instead of into jars in the freezer. It takes up less space and it's easier to access. I take a baking sheet and I put the sill pad on and I pull these cubes out and put them onto, the first one I kind of always wreck. It's hard to get the first one out. And I'll put these squares on. Well, the first one is always a mess, like I've said. So that ends up being a big pile. Okay, I switched to a bigger spatula. Look at that nice cube. That is beautiful. These are my gelatin squares and blobs over here that are on the baking sheets. These will go in the freezer. Then they're frozen cubes, and then they go into Ziploc. I'll put this back in the fridge until I get these frozen. After about an hour or two, the cubes are nice and solid. And that's what you want. You want to be able to pick these up because we're going to put them in a bag. Even the clumps are good. And using the sill pad makes it real easy to pull them off. These go in a Ziploc bag and they're ready to use, whether you want just a cup of broth or you're doing a stew and you need a couple cubes for braising instead of a whole jar. It's a great way to store broth, but you got to make sure it gets to the gelatin stage. This is a nice combination of just a little bit of fat with the broth, and it's perfect for your recipes. Just put these in a Ziploc bag. Usually try to get them flat. See, these are just fine. And they go back in the freezer in the Ziploc bags and you pull out what you need. I absolutely love doing it this way. But if your broth doesn't come out gel, you have to just freeze it in the jars. So that's it. I got one bag, several more bags to go. And then if it's stuck together when you pull it out of the freezer, you just kind of just drop it on the counter and it will kind of come apart. So there you go, a great way to store broth.